I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. It's the final countdown. We are 1 week away from Election Day, and the presidential race, it's still a coin flip. Or is it? Joining me back on the podcast today with a look at the candidates' closing strategies is my friend, Fox News Radio political analyst and editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider, Josh Kraushaar. And welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call my smart friends like Josh and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. And so, Josh, let's just jump right in. We're a week to go. It's been very close. I use the phrase tied and getting closer. But let me ask you, do you still think it's tied right now?
Well, Dana, this is a very, very close presidential election. But if you look at almost all of the high quality polls and look at the trend lines, whether it's the national polls or the battleground states, and you look where this race was a month ago and where it is now, there's no doubt that Donald Trump has the late momentum. Yep. You saw the Wall Street Journal poll nationally showing Trump up by a couple points versus a more favorable outcome for Harris a month prior. You look at, almost every reputable survey has shown the momentum in Trump's direction. That said, these are still margin of error races. And when you look at the battleground state numbers, Dana, especially those three Rust Belt states, the Midwestern states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and also Pennsylvania, we're talking, and I've talked to strategists on the ground in both or all those three contests, and we're talking literally like statistically tied 1 point races in all the internal polling I'm hearing. So this is going to come down to the wire. I think we're going to have a long couple days, frankly, of counting and getting a call after the election, after election night. But look, I think the momentum is clearly in Donald Trump's corner.
Okay, a couple of things here. I agree that right now it definitely just has a feel, aside from the polls, of momentum. The Trump campaign is consistently beating the Harris campaign to the ball in messaging and in tactics, in creativity, in response, and they seem to have a lot of energy on their side. Now, that could be a little bit of a mirage, because I was talking to Hemmer this morning, and he told me that in Georgia, for example, the early vote that's in has a lot of older white suburban women who are voting. I don't know what that means necessarily, but it might mean that there's a little bit of a movement for Kamala Harris there. Who knows, actually? I mean, as I'm even saying that, I don't actually believe it. I feel like the momentum is on Trump's side. Will that be enough to make the difference in the battleground states? I don't know. But I also know this, Josh. Just looking at media trajectories, there were some stories in today's papers that indicated to me that the Democrats are already planning on how to handle it if they lose. And if they are writing articles like that, then that means that the feeling out there is there. But I heard something last week that made me sort of tap the brakes on my thinking. Because part of me thought last week that it felt like 2016, where Trump ekes out a win, right? And then people are surprised. The polling was wrong, et cetera. Then I said, actually, it feels like 2012 when Obama won. And I'll tell a funny story here, if you don't mind. At that time on the 5, Bob Beckel was still with us, the late Bob Beckel, our wonderful friend. And I was convinced and pretty much wanted Romney to win. Not pretty much. Obviously, I did, but I was trying to be a responsible journalist. But I only had the 5 at the time as a show. And so I'm on record in the lead up on the Friday night before the election in 2012 saying that Romney is likely to win or has a good chance to win or something like that. And after the show, Bob Beckel pulled me aside and he said, "Kid, I hate to tell you this, but I want you to be prepared. He's going to lose. Obama is definitely going to win." And I remember going home so mad at Bob Beckel. And then on election night, I think that we called that election around 9:30 at night or something. It was really early.
Right.
And Romney lost so badly. And I was sitting next to Bob Beckel. And I said, "Bob, I'm embarrassed that I was way far out there on the limb saying that Romney was going to win." And I've always remembered that. So that's why I'm a little cautious. But then I read today, somebody that I admire suggested it's like Dole Kemp versus Bill Clinton, where Dole really fell away at the end of that campaign and there was like no energy and the momentum was just fading. And that's kind of how I feel today about Kamala Harris, but I'm cautious to say that because I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, Dana, I do think it's like 2016, and which was a close race, by the way. Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, and the margins in those three blue wall states were extremely competitive, even though Trump won all three of them in that election. So I do get a lot of vibes from 2016. You know, Harris has spent the last couple weeks on the campaign trail shoring up her base, right? Shoring up African-American men. Michelle Obama giving that speech this week on abortion rights, reproductive rights. The people who care about that issue, abortion being one of the strongest issues for Democrats, are going to be voting for her anyways. It's about increasing margins, increasing enthusiasm among their core voters. They've been showing signs of worrying about slippage with some core constituencies that make up the working class base of the party, namely men. You know, the leaks that she wanted to go on Joe Rogan's show and then ended up not doing it. I mean, to me, that is a sign that there is something in their internals, in their, you know, internal data that suggests that they're not where they need to be at this late stage in the campaign. Even the last event that I believe that the vice president is doing is in Philadelphia with Bruce Springsteen. I was in Philadelphia with Bruce Springsteen and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in 2016. And I remember this, speaking of anecdotes, I remember this really clearly, where I still thought Hillary Clinton was probably still the favorite that morning. And I got a couple calls from some very well-placed Democratic officials who were looking at House race polling, the latest internal data that morning, and were just alarmed that races across the country were not looking as good as they thought. And I had to think to myself, how does that square with the narrative that the Democrats had this degree of optimism and confidence that they were going to win that election? Turned out that a lot of the on the ground internal polling, early assessment was accurate. That the fact that Hillary Clinton was in Detroit and doing things to shore up her own base was a sign of the problems for the Democratic Party. And I get a lot of those vibes this year with Harris trying to shore up her base and, you know, frankly, doing even the event with Liz Cheney, which, you know, in theory would be a way to kind of show she can moderate her views and show where she's moved to that was not Liz Cheney moved more to the left at that event than Kamala Harris moved to the center. Even, and on that, I couldn't, after watching that interview and then watching Tim Walz on The Daily Show, being asked why they want Liz Cheney's support given her views on foreign policy, and Tim Walz rejecting Liz Cheney on foreign policy. And the reason that supposedly you're having Liz Cheney is to get those Nikki Haley, national security focused voters. And there you have on that same day, Tim Walz mocking those very voters. I couldn't help but think that they're just playing to the base, playing to people that should already be voting for them. So I do see the smoke signals looking like 2016. And that's consistent, Dana, with all the polling I'm hearing from both sides, where, again, very, very close race, very, very close race. But the momentum has been with Trump in the battleground states, and that, you know, that they are worried about some core constituencies that normally vote Democratic that are not showing up in the numbers and by the margins that the Democrats are hoping for.
So one of the things we talk about in politics is that in the final stretch, you make a closing argument for why somebody should vote for you. There were two big sort of rallies this weekend. I would say that Harris's rally with Beyonce, though she didn't perform, she gave a 4-minute speech. I mean, hello. That to me was a huge miss. That was a miss. But Michelle Obama was the big draw for that one. And she gave a speech that was great. And then you had Trump's Madison Square Garden rally with the energy through the roof. Like ideologically diverse people coming together, having so much fun being together, feeling like, wow, I'm with all of these people and I'm not crazy for having the views that I have. And it's a big run up, and there was a lot of things that you could look at as a traditional campaign person and say, oh my gosh, I never would have done that. And I'd probably put myself in that category. However, at the same time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Tim Walz decided to, this is why the Kamala Harris campaign to me is behind the ball. They had Harris and AOC watch the rally together live on television while playing Madden, which I guess the NFL video game, right? And during their conversation, Tim Walz suggests that AOC should become the Speaker of the House. And I'm thinking, who are they appealing to? What independent voter is thinking, yeah, that's a great idea?
Oh, by the way, Dana, they were playing Madden on this Twitch stream, which I'm not, candidly, like there are all these different platforms. But they're playing during a Sunday where a lot of people are watching NFL games, real life NFL games themselves. Right. So like if you're trying, you don't
have to play the video game.
Well, it reminds me that AOC was sort of criticized, and I know you were talking about this on the 5 recently. She was trying to campaign in Philadelphia during the Eagles game.
Right. Like, knock yourself out.
People are watching TV that they're glued to the game. They don't want to have someone knocking at their door about
asking about Kamala Harris.
I mean, that could turn you off. I mean, that could lose you voters. So, yeah, there's been a lot of odd moves from the Harris campaign. Look, I think that the Madison Square Garden rally was a risk, and I think it didn't play well for the Trump campaign. When you have Republicans like Rick Scott, you also have,
Maria Salazar,
some of the New York representatives as well, criticizing one of the comedians, which I didn't think was that funny.
Yeah, the comedian,
attacking Puerto Ricans, yeah.
I love to go to comedy shows, and I laugh at everything. I always laugh. Although I feel like at the Madison Square Garden rally, you didn't even need that because the crowd is hyped. Like, they're already ready to go.
That's a message. I mean, this campaign has been a race where people don't want to play. I guess they assume that the moderate voters, the Nikki Haley Republicans, the moderate John Fetterman Democrats, they're not in play. That seems to be the thinking.
Do you think that's true?
I don't know. I don't think that's true, actually. I think those are one part of, I don't think they're the only persuadable voters, but that is an important constituency. I mean, look, you see a notable constituency in the Democratic Party as represented by someone like John Fetterman in the most important state in the country. And you see a constituency in the Republican Party represented by Nikki Haley, who won a solid share of the vote in the Republican primaries. That could make the difference in these key states. Every vote matters, given how close this race is. So the notion that neither party is actually trying to win them. I mean, I think Harris, by getting Cheney's support, was trying to do that, but I don't think the Monday tour gave these voters anything to really hold their hat on. And certainly that MSG rally isn't going to give anyone who's sort of a traditional conservative. I mean, they were attacking Dick Cheney, attacking the Patriot Act. I mean, things that you and I. The Bush party, like the things that they stood for, national security, foreign policy, and a strong defense, laughing at it and rejecting it. Yeah. So I don't think there was a whole lot for those. If there's any undecided voters left, I didn't think they really gave the party anything and undecided voters to chew on.
Another thing that I heard over the weekend is that Republicans tend to get more energized and turn out to vote more if they think they're going to win. So what we've been talking about is that the momentum shift feels like it's in Trump's favor, that could help Republicans get out to win. But at the same time, I was told that Democrats tend to turn out to vote more if they think they're going to lose. So then I feel like, we just evened it out again.
Yeah, it's the psychology of it's also like the early vote versus vote on election day psychology, and where you have different people of different ideologies voting in different ways because of how they view and how they trust the system. The thing I would be cautious about if I was the Trump campaign, I don't believe there's like a secret critical mass of Trump voters, shy Trump voters that we saw in 2016 and 2020. I think at this point, if Trump, because of the unpopularity of the Biden administration, Harris's polarization, I think if people who were silent about Trump or didn't want to showcase their support for Trump are much more open about it now. I think we saw that in New York. I mean, I think the Madison Square Garden rally could be a good example of that. So I don't think there's going to be any misses in the polls to the level we saw in 2016 and even 2020. I think the polling is actually probably pretty spot on, showing a close race, but with a narrow Trump advantage. And so I think, if you're Trump, I wouldn't get too cocky about going to states that are blue states when you need to win the core 7. You need to win Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona. Those are the big ones. It doesn't matter if you get close in Virginia. It doesn't matter if you get close in New Mexico. Ultimately, you need a win and spend every moment of the last week in the campaign focusing on those battleground states, because that's where the game is going to be decided.
My last question for you in this block is, you mentioned something at the very top about when we might know the final result. I know it's impossible to say. In 2020, that final result came in on the Saturday after Election Day. Partly, this is not because there's some nefarious conspiracy theory out there. It just depends on the way these states count their ballots, and if they're very close, if it triggers a recount, and how long that takes. So everyone's going to have to pack their patience, perhaps, unless it's like so obvious that there's a big landslide winner.
That's right. Look, if it's a decisive win for either candidate, we will know. But I don't think that's where this race is headed. I think we're going to be neck and neck in all the key states, and we're going to have to count all the ballots and wait to declare a winner. Pennsylvania, state law requires the state to wait before counting early ballots or mail-in ballots. So there's going to be a slow count in Pennsylvania. If you remember 2020, it took a while for Pennsylvania to count all of its votes, and it may take a day at least for that picture in Pennsylvania to really show up. And, I think if it's close, it could take longer. Arizona is a mail-in ballot. Most people vote by mail. That's going to take at least 2 or 3 days if it comes down to it.
Can they, do they start counting those mail-in ballots before Election Day in Arizona?
They can, but the history of, and I don't think there's any changes of significance that would allow them to expedite the process. So traditionally, Arizona has a process, Maricopa County in particular, where Phoenix is, where they, if you remember from 2020, they count, a big batch one day, then they count another batch the next day, and it won't be until maybe Wednesday or Thursday where we really start to get a clear picture of that state. So look, it's possible that one candidate will sweep all the close states, and the ones that count earlier, like, North Carolina perhaps, or Florida, Georgia, they may show where this race is headed. But if it's a close race like we expect, I think we're going to have to wait at least a day to get a picture of who won. Okay, well, that's good to just caution everybody. Josh, stay right there. We will be right back with more Perino on politics. And we're back with Perino on politics. Josh, it looks to me like one thing that does feel like it's getting more settled is that there will be a Republican majority in the Senate, given where those Senate races are. Does that sound right? Yeah, I mean, that's a very safe prediction. Republicans. I'm good at those. The lock, in sports, the lock of the week. That's the most the lock, I think, is that Republicans get the 2 Senate seats they need. Is it 2 or 3 to maintain a 51 seat majority, to win a 51 seat majority? Look, West Virginia is 100% going to flip from Joe Manchin to Jim Justice. Montana, which was looking competitive for a little while, the nationalization of our elections has put John Tester in a pretty unforgiving spot, and it looks like he's going to lose to Tim Sheehy if there's a surprise. If Democrats hold on to the Senate, it would be Montana, I believe, where you see an upset. But it looks like all the polling is pretty consistent that John Tester's headed to defeat. And then you just look at Ohio. That would, by the way, automatically give Republicans that majority, right? Just getting West Virginia and Montana, and then you have Ohio, where the trend lines in that race, a red state now, going towards the Republicans. It's going to be competitive, I think, but I think Moreno has the momentum in that one, the Republican. And then you got these purple state races, including Nevada, by the way, which if there's a surprise on election night, it may be that Nevada, the Nevada Senate race and the Nevada presidential contest, where Republicans are pouring in late money. They didn't think they were going to win Nevada. They thought the Senate race was lost. All of a sudden, there's a lot of money going into Nevada, especially that Senate race, looking for a surprise upset. So if Republicans have a good night, if Trump wins the presidential race, you could see the Nevada race, the Pennsylvania race, Senate race between Bob Casey, Dave McCormick. You have the Michigan race between Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers, and you got a Wisconsin race with Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde. These are neck and neck races. They could go either way. But if Republicans have a good night, all of them could end up flipping, or most of them or all of them could end up flipping Republican. I was going to save this bold prediction for later, but I'll say it now so I can say that I said it first. Although I don't know if I really am the one who said it first. I feel like if Trump wins the presidency and the Republicans have this Senate majority, I think that you will see a vacancy in a retirement on the Supreme Court pretty early on, and that Trump will get another judge to put on the court. I would not be surprised. Clarence Thomas, I'll be looking at his plans in the not too distant future. How do you see the House? Because one of the things that Michael Whatley of the Republican National Committee told us this morning on America's Newsroom is that Trump's rally in Madison Square Garden wasn't necessarily because they think they can flip New York to be a red state, though Trump says he can. But let's just say that's probably unlikely. But that rally might help some home state congressional races that are really tight, because
when Kevin McCarthy was Speaker, he really pushed to try to get some great candidates for the GOP, and they're in tight races because they were targeted by the Democrats. How close are those, and could the Republicans actually keep the House as well?
Yeah, look, most of the Republicans in the delegation in New York were at that Madison Square Garden rally. Honestly, I'm not sure if it helped them. I think the ones that are in tough races are in bluish districts, so I think they need to show that they can win over some Democrats. And I think that you have races like the one involving Congressman Brandon Williams up in Syracuse, looking a little bit tough for Republicans to hold on to. But you also have Mike Lawler, who you know well, Dana. He's in a very blue district in Westchester and Rockland counties in suburban New York City, and he's doing quite well. In fact, the Cook Report moved his race to lean Republican, which is, to me, a sign that Democrats are having trouble even in some of the bluer districts that they hope to pick up. The national environment is more challenging than they expected, and even some of the bluer districts are proving tough.
One of the reasons that Lawler won, as I understand it, was immigration.
Yeah.
And crime. And those are the two issues that are still pretty prominent.
So what I'm hearing on the House side, California and New York have almost half of the toss-up, or maybe a third of the toss-up races. So that's unusual that you have the House battlegrounds in safe states, and then you have the Senate battlegrounds, and obviously, the presidential race is going to be decided in other states. I'm hearing the same as you are, Dana. In New York, Republicans have a lot of momentum. The scandals involving Democrat like Eric Adams, the crime rate, the immigration crisis, that's hurt the Democratic Party brand a whole lot in New York. California may be the same. You may see a similar dynamic, though the polling I'm hearing in California is a little more favorable for Democrats. The thing that the problem Republicans have in some of these classic suburban seats, like Don Bacon's Omaha seat, and some of the more bluish suburban areas of the country, it's a challenge. The Democratic or the Trump brand is not particularly strong, and it's going to be harder for some of these Republican swing district lawmakers to run ahead of the ticket too much to win their seats again.
And a quick thought from you about Jewish American votes in some of these swing states. I've been kind of I read your newsletter every morning, The Jewish Insider. I find it super helpful for lots of different reasons, not just on the politics, but on what's happening in Israel and America's reaction to it. But on the politics side of things, if you get a significant amount of the Jewish vote to go for the Republican over the Democrat, you might make a difference in some of these battlegrounds.
If this race is coming down, the presidential race coming down to Pennsylvania, and you listen to John Fetterman talk about how he's disgusted, frankly, with elements of the Democratic Party on how they've pandered to far left anti-Israel activism in the party. There's some polling out there that suggests that there's a little bit of movement among Jewish voters in Pennsylvania towards Republicans. In a close race, Jews make up about 3% of the vote in Pennsylvania. If it's a close race, you could see small shifts making an outsized impact. It could make the difference. In fact, Dave McCormick, who we talked about, who's running for the Senate, has actually done a lot of outreach and really spent a lot of time within the state's Jewish communities.
Well,
and
in fact, he's doing, tonight is Monday, October 28th, in case you're listening to this later. And Dave McCormick is going to do a live event in Pittsburgh today with Dan Senor of the Call Me Back podcast, which I'm a huge fan of. And Dan worked in the Bush administration. They worked together there. They know each other well. Dan's very popular and Dan's everything. I love this guy, but I would say very popular in the Jewish community. So they're doing a big event in Pittsburgh tonight.
And Dan's voice has a lot of clout within the organized Jewish community. That's a better way to phrase it than, as I said.
Well,
I'm a friend. I mean,
he's like an influencer.
Well, Dan's a friend. He represents the broad middle, like the center right, center left. A lot of people listen to his podcast, listen to his voice, and having that conversation with Dave McCormick is a sign of credibility. And it's not like it came out of nowhere. Dave McCormick is running a very good campaign, but is also spending time putting in the outreach within communities like Squirrel Hill, where the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in 2018 took place. He's really walked the walk, and I think that could make a difference in a very close Senate race.
All right, we will be right back with more Perino on Politics. Welcome back to Perino on Politics. Josh, I I'm going to ask you the signature question I have, but then I have a couple from the internet that I'd like to ask you as well. So mine is, with 8 wake-ups to go before the election, what do you pay attention to in politics?
We're now in the home stretch, so we basically have a week to go. I mean, one thing I always like to say, actions speak a lot louder than even the polls do. So I'm looking at sort of the confidence factor and what we talked about at the outset of the show, Dana. Which campaigns are looking to kind of build on their support and which ones are playing defense? Maybe things change. There are October surprises in even the final week of the campaign. 2016, you had the Comey investigation, last minute Comey investigation. You also had the Access Hollywood video in the last.
Well, don't forget also the Hunter Biden laptop.
Hunter Biden, yeah.
And the suppression of that.
Suppression of it, yeah, which people didn't really fully get to digest because of that suppression. So I'm watching sort of the aftermath of the Madison Square Garden rally. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but there's signs when you have Republicans criticizing a couple speakers that's something you don't want in the final week in a close race like this. So, I'm looking at these October surprises too, and how both campaigns take advantage of them if they see fit.
All right. Here is a question from Jill. She asks, what methodology the campaigns use for what they call internal polls, and why are they different from the other polls that the rest of us get to see?
Well, campaigns spend more money on polling, and they're not just trying to figure out who's up and who's down, but they're trying to figure out what issues drive voters. It's a lot more sophisticated, frankly, than a lot of the polling you see from the media and from public pollsters. Candidly, there are only a few public pollsters I really trust a whole lot, the ones that are done by campaign professionals, the Fox poll, for instance, or Wall Street Journal poll. Those are examples of some of the best pollsters in the business who have experience in campaign polling, also doing polling for a media organization. So we see a total throw spaghetti against the wall kind of look at polling, and everyone averages all the polls out there. To me, there are a few really high quality polls that I pay outsized attention to. But look, the internal data, talking to sources from both campaigns, listening to what their internal data shows, trying to talk to as many people who are on the ground, working on the campaigns or involved in the races, that getting data from them and hearing their candid impressions of what's happening is just as important to me as the public polling.
All right. Another question is, do you think polls are underestimating Trump's low propensity voters again, or have they figured out how to deal with that?
So I do think that I don't anticipate a big polling surprise. I think pollsters have adjusted accordingly after realizing some of the methodology they got wrong in past presidential elections. And I doubt you're going to see a huge error in terms of underestimating the Trump vote. In fact, one of the big national polls actually looked at the voters who are most likely to vote. The most committed voters are actually more Democratic these days. So the 9s and the 10s, as they call them in the business, the ones who are almost guaranteed to vote, they actually lean Democrat. The next wave of voters who are likely to vote but are not quite as regular voters, they lean Republican. It's actually those less committed voters, people who are on the couch, people who may not vote regularly in elections, that are the most Trump-friendly votes in the country. It's sort of a reversal of past elections. And I remember growing up and following politics and then covering politics. And the conventional wisdom was that a high turnout election helps Democrats, a low turnout election helps. A high turnout election helps Republicans, a low turnout election helps Democrats. The conventional wisdom now is that the key to this election is getting those Republican voters, a lot of young men who don't participate or not part of the political process, get them to the polls. They are leaning Trump, and if they show up, Trump should do better in this election.
Last question before I have one funny story from the weekend. The question is, are there still only 7 battleground states, or has the map expanded for either of the candidates?
Well, it's a great question.
It is a good question, and that came from Denver Tigers.
So the way I would put it is that if it's a big win for either side, you're going to see states that were not expected to be battleground states get competitive, or maybe even a surprise flip. For example, the talks that Trump might visit New Mexico, a state that has trended a little bit on the Republican. It's a Democratic state, but it's tilted a little more Republican in recent years. That's a state perhaps to watch. New Hampshire is another state that hasn't voted Republican for president, but if it's a big win for Trump, I could see New Hampshire being close. Maybe Harris still wins it, but being much more close than expected. But ultimately, those are not states that are going to decide the election. The 7 battleground states, especially those 3 blue wall states in the Midwest, those are the ones I'm watching most closely because those are going to be the tipping point states. In other words, if Trump doesn't win Pennsylvania, that's going to be a big red flag for him, his ability to win the election. Ultimately, you would expect the less competitive states to, even if they're closer than usual, to go in the usual directions.
Very interesting. Let me tell you this funny story from the weekend. So we're at the beach down the Jersey Shore, and we have a friend who we used to walk with in the mornings, and our dogs are friends. And unfortunately, his dog got old, and unfortunately, he passed away. So the guy's been looking for a dog. He wants a flat coat retriever. Looking for breeders, looking for dogs, and he finds these 2 dogs, through his sources. And there's 2 boys available. They're 8 months old. And he really wants to get one, but the breeder will only give them to somebody who will take the both of them together. And that's a lot of dog to ask for. And it's like, it's a lot for him.
Yeah.
And he said, but I've almost convinced my daughter-in-law to take the other one. I said, that's great. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. He said, well, she has one condition. I'm like, okay. She says I have to vote for Kamala Harris. I was like, wow, she drives a hard bargain. This woman knows how to get out the vote. And I said, have you made a decision? He said, not yet. And I have to tell you, Josh, I don't think those dogs are coming to the shore yet.
Yeah, that dog isn't going to bark, huh?
I don't think so. I just thought that was the funniest thing. I was like, wow, people are getting serious.
Well, that shows how close and how intense every vote matters. Even and then maybe there'll be a dog, the pet owning and the dog owning community. That's
right. I remember, and when Obama was first learning how, he was kind of the pioneer that did the online small dollar fundraising, and they had cat owners for Obama or cat lovers for Obama, and I thought that's so dumb. And then I realized, oh wow, actually, who's laughing now? And he won it.
That's amazing.
Josh Kraushaar, thank you. Everybody follow him, and we'll hear you on Fox News Radio on election night. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.